And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you Docker and use that to kind of show some of our new device registration features, and as well as our new connection graph that we have. What I have here right now is you'll see my Remote.It desktop. I have signed in as a test user here. I have no devices. So the first thing I'm going to do here is click on the Add Device button, which is that blue cross at the top there. All right, and I'm going to select Docker here. As you can see here, there's a Docker run command that's automatically generated with a registration code built in for your account, which includes the SSH service. What's new here is we have this Add Service button now, so you can add a quick service here for not just SSH, but say HTTP. If you had an HTTP service you wanted to connect to as well from this device, you could add that service. You could also remove the SSH if you wanted to. But this way we can just go through and add services that we want. We can also now add tags. Tags are great for grouping and filtering. So if I click on that tag and I say webinar and I select webinar, I've already been testing, so it's there. You'll notice that this Docker run command kind of refreshed really quick. And that's because the registration code changed. If I add another tag, instead of the 9D12 there, if I add another tag, say, sales or something like that, and again, see that registration tag, the registration code just changes. So what I'm going to do now is just copy that. You can get a lot more information on our Docker image by clicking on this link to the Docker Hub page, and that has some production settings that you might want to set besides this basic run command, which is basically for development or demo purposes. I'm just going to paste that into my terminal here and hit enter. And when I do that, I get a Docker container running. So if I do a Docker PS, we see it's a Remote.It agent latest. It's running. It's got a name here. And what I'm going to do next is this is going to automatically register with our desktop. As you see here, this device registered. And since it was the only device, it got selected. Okay. So now we have our device here. That is the Docker container. It selected it from the device list. So if I go back to my devices, you see it here. And then I click on that, we're back in here. As you can see, it added two tags, the sales and the webinar tag. It also added the SSH and the HTTP service. This HTTP service doesn't really do much. I just added it to show an example here. There is no HTTP service that I'm going to connect to. But let's start with the SSH service. This SSH service, we have SSH running on our Docker container in our Remote.It agent. So this actually is a connection. Let's start with the service configuration. You'll see that we now have this connection graph up here. And you see this arrow pointing to the service end. When we select the service configuration now, it shows us what end of the connection we are dealing with. So when you talk about this service host being 127.0.0.1, that means it's from the remote agent, which is the Docker container in this case. And the service is the SSH service. That's the endpoint. So we're talking to the Docker container itself, and we're going to connect to the port 22 on that Docker container. And then that we just have the service name there. So let's go back and let's go back here and let's look at our connection configuration really quick before we start this. Then when I click on the connection configuration, that now points to our local endpoint and our local agent. Our local agent in this case is really our desktop. So we're connecting from our desktop here to our Docker container here. We're going to use the SSH client here to talk to that, and it's going to talk to the SSH service over here. And we do that by just clicking the start button. And as you can see, it's starting up right now. And it is in an idle connection. So I'm going to go back over here and you see that we are now idle, connect on demand. And it's given me a local endpoint. This local endpoint, the 644E, whatever, -ssh@.at.remote.it is just a DNS entry that we kind of make on the local host. It points to your local desktop host. And this port here is for, as you remember when we did the connection configuration, that port there is on your local machine on this section here. So if we go to configuration, We see that local port. We see that subdomain, which is the first part of that .at.remote.It, and it points to this section. So now we kind of give you an idea of where you're, what code you're working on and what you're seeing, what port is where. All right, so I'm just going to launch this. And as you can see, it has a URL of SSH URL of with username at that domain name. So it's going to prompt me for the username. I'm just going to type in root, hit enter, and as you can see, it brought up another terminal window here. And I'm in. Just like that, we are in our Docker container here. Okay, I'm going to exit that. Go back over here, and that's it. That shows a basic connection. So what we did now, you'll notice that the lines here have also changed. The tunnel before had a double dotted line. That meant that we were idle on our connection there. We weren't fully connected. Now that we're connected, it's turned to a double solid line. All right, so this means we actually have a full-on connection going between our local desktop agent using the SSH client, which was, the endpoint there, and talking to our SSH server in the Docker container. If I click disconnect, we go back to idle. You see the graph has changed again. It's now back to that double dotted line, showing you that it's idle. It's kind of up, but not fully up. We're not using any resources. We're not pinging anything. We're not using any network right now. All we're doing is it's ready so that if I just use it, so if I just type in SSH over here, and I paste in that URL that we had. So if I go to the endpoint here and I copy that, and I say root at there, what you'll see here is it starts connecting. You see this? It's connecting. Just using that tunnel made it come up. So it's coming up right now. It's connecting. And we're in over here. And in a second here, there we go. We're up and it's changed. So I didn't have to launch it through here. That connection is live. It's just there. And if you use that connection, it'll go live automatically. So, and that's it. That's, showing how we connect. The new connection graph we talked about. We talked about the new tags and adding services at registration. And you can do that for all your devices here that are listed in our add device section. You have the same thing. So if I click on Linux, it's generate a command. You have the same process here for adding a Linux device or a Raspberry Pi or an ARM virtual hardware, any of those.